Well, if I were to ask you what comes to mind when you think of the word city, there might be positive or negative images, right? And that image might be influenced by whatever happened last. Like if you had a great meal this morning or last night, you might be like, I love the city. If you stepped in something weird on the way here, or you couldn't find a place to park, you may not have a high or favorable view of the city. But what we've been doing as a church is that looking at this concept from the book of Genesis all the way to the New Jerusalem by the time we get to Easter Sunday, looking at the duality of are cities the worst places in the world, or are they the best places in the world? Or are they both? Is there this commingling of innovation and cultivation and great ideas and exploitation and ruin, sometimes coming out of the same people? Sometimes you being that person. and just paying attention to the way in which money and time and energy are being built up, sometimes in your life on an illusion. You know, that's the journey of Lent, not to make you feel stupid, not to make you feel shame, but to point you toward, to stoke your affections toward a greater city, a greater hope than the one that we could build with our hands. So if you're new to the room, I'm Scott, I'm the lead pastor of the Foundry. I'm glad you're here. Where you came in and you were like, do I go straight? Do I go up? Where do I go? There's a little station that says new here, and I hope that you'll just stop in and say hello and maybe meet somebody. There's no bait and switch. No one's going to try to sell you something. There's just want to thank you for being with us today. It's warm again, so I'll be curbside sipping a warm drink, and you can say hi to me too. I'd love to meet you. Glad that you're here. So here's the thing. As I think about Babel as a city, I don't know if this happens for you, but I'm just going to tell you my first response reading of this text. I don't know if this happens at work. I don't know if this happens in your house. I don't know if this happens on your block, where people get worked up about something that doesn't make sense to you. And even their attempt to explain why they're worked up about it still doesn't make sense to you. You can hear fighting upstairs, and you go upstairs to try to be referee, and there's two very passionate young ladies that are telling on each other, and you're like, yeah, I don't get it. And you've got some HR version of that. You've got some neighborhood Facebook version of that. And if I'm honest with you, at a baseline reading of the Tower of Babel text, that's how I feel about this passage. It reads like God just can't handle all the things that we like about living in a city, like innovation and collaboration and oneness. How many bumper stickers and billboards do you see peppered all over creation about the imagine what it would be like if we could all work together as one, and we could all work together as it sort of resonates like there's a God with a weird God complex that can't handle people innovating. And we have to take a closer look at the text. We have to pay attention to the text in its context to get a kind of a better understanding of what's going on here. Because what Babel is going to try to show us is what happens when we try to build the world we want without the God we need. Okay? The world we want without the God we need. So a key operating verse that we're going to keep coming back to is verse 4, and it's page 7 in that Bible in front of you if you want to have the text in front of you. Verse 4 on page 7 says this idea of, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. I want to highlight that first clause, and then we're going to highlight the second clause. But we're going to chapter 11, verse 4 is where we're going to ripple out and try to make sense of this text, okay? This idea of building the name for ourselves, and the idea that building of a name for ourselves is going to lead to some kind of ruin. Okay, if we look at the first 11 chapters of Genesis, I don't know if you've ever sat and tried to read it in one sitting. But if like you're like one of those readers that like picks out and detects themes when you read like something in context over the course of time, you would notice something in the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. You don't have to be a Hebrew scholar. You don't have to have studied theology for years and years to do this. Like you would see that there's a pattern where God creates, mankind makes a mess of things, and God tries to like through another through line do something redemptive with the mess, right? From Eden to a flood, now to Babel. You would see that as a pattern. And you would also see the contrast between Genesis 1 and 2, where there's this oneness and there's this magic, like, oh, we're connected to God, we're connected to each other, like we're connected to creation, and the theme, the contrast of building something for another purpose. So Cain last week was building something for his own lineage. This week, what are they trying to do? We're trying to make a name for ourselves. So that contrast has to pop for us. And there, we can begin to understand some like kind of, all right, next layer down. Some cautionary tales for a group of people that are self-reliant and ambitious and don't like to be told that they can't do something, and other things that describe the people in this room. That are like skills that get endorsed on LinkedIn and like get you other jobs, and like your gusto and your can-do attitude and your innovation. Like we see some cautionary tales if we just kind of go to the next level down, right? One is that your ambition, your drive, the reason why people often will move to a city or move to another city because this city's not working for them anymore has a shadow side. It can be exhausting. It can lead to burnout. It can make you pay attention to the wrong things. Right? It can mean that you're not present with your family. There's another layer to that, another cautionary tale that might be, like a little harder for us to admit, that like this idea of like these created things, like the stuff that's been entrusted to us, if we take them into our own hands and we try to build a life with them, money, sex, power, it could derail us, but it can also hurt a lot of other people. Like you could build a business that's really lucrative to you and yours and exploit someone on the other side of the world, or exploit someone on the other side of the city. You could build something that would be like great for your neighborhood and awful for the people on the other side of the street. Like that impulse, like you could leverage created tools. You could manipulate sex in a way that brings gratification to you and harm or hurt to someone else. Babel says, hold on, wait a minute, not so fast with this selfish ambition, with this way in which we take the things that are created things and leverage them to kind of build our own kingdom. If there's a weird passage in the book of Judges that said Israel had no king and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that's kind of like one level down what's happening in Babel. Like here's a group of people kind of collectively going, we know the way to go, we know the way to get there, and we're going to work together, and we don't really need God's help. Reverend Gardner C. Taylor, in a message that he called Why Modern Man Needs the Gospel, famous AME preacher, he said, modern man, transplanter of human organs, voyager to the immensities of outer space, master of government, architect of his own destiny, master of his own fate, the captain of his soul. What pride we have in ourselves. We need no supernatural help. We ourselves are as gods, and we have the right answers in our own wisdom. But when the sense of God goes, all that is worthwhile in society goes also. Freed from the restraints of religion, the passions rush forth like mad demons to disfigure and scar all of life. Now, you can think that's old man yelling at lawn, but what is he saying? And in the constraints of religion, you might like get tripped up on that line. What is he saying? If we don't have if everyone can just do what's right in their own eyes, and this group of people in Babel can just do what they think is like the right thing to do, we will begin to move away from like a unified picture of what is good and what is true and what is beautiful about the universe. Because what we'll do is like, well, I like my version of that and you like your version of that. And that all sounds good till we go to a stop sign. Fort and Webster. You know, I'm there yesterday and I have the right of way. And here comes a truck that just decides that stop signs are optional in Baltimore City. And he goes. And I wanted to let him know that there was a right way to do a thing and he didn't do it. So I honked the horn. And with his window down, he leaned his face and went, bah, 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 and went, what are you? And just kept going. He's not in the room because we would have a reconciliation conversation before communion today. Now, and like here's the deal, right? I have my own version of that. I have my own version where I'm the dude honking the horn, jeering at you because like your definition of what is good and true and right in the world doesn't fit my sensibilities and the way in which the world works for me. And Babel is on like one level down from like the text. It's kind of a cautionary tale of a world where we make God's truth in our own image versus a collective pursuit of truth together, right? So on one level, Lent, like we said, Lent's not a season to just like, oh, we do ashes and we fast from things because coffee's bad and alcohol is bad and food is bad and all things are bad and church only talks about things that are bad. But to say, let's pay attention to the ways in which we manipulate created things to build our own platform. Let's pay attention to our attachments. Let's pay attention to the things that we call and manipulate to build our own pictures of ambition that may not reflect God's provision for the world. And to like, again, lower the pretenses and go, hey, like that, the recipe for that in Babel was burnout, exhaustion, and disruption. So what's the invitation? How can that be reframed? Now, if we stop right there and we just stop on that level, then what we've done is we've taken a bunch of Western people who are very individualistic, like you are, and we've applied a communal Eastern ancient text to Western individualists, which gives us one picture of the context, okay? The things that we say apply, but I actually think there's a greater invitation if we look fuller at the context. So there's a broader, more existential invitation here for us to consider that I want to invite you to work with me in, right? The idea kind of comes out of, if we look at let's look at the second part of Genesis 11:4. Let's go back to it. Come, let us build a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we might make a name for ourselves. Okay, we talked about that. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. What is that all about? Okay, to make sense of that, we actually have to go back to Genesis 10. And I'm going to try not to lose you because I'm presuming you didn't spend your week studying ancient Hebrew. And I am like doing the diet version of that. I am not an ancient Hebrew scholar myself, okay? Like Genesis 10 actually, this is called this Table of Nations. It's a genealogy. It's a genealogy of kind of the world that scatters after Babel. In Genesis 10, 8 through 10, we see here on the plain of Shinar kind of the people that were probably kind of holding down the fort, okay? Check this out. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That's why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers of his kingdom were in Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar. So this is not just a story about Western ambition and what it can do and not do for the human. This is actually a conversation about security without God, or security kind of co-opting God's kingdom on our own terms, and its unintended consequences, okay? So Nimrod is actually the consolidator of power. What's happening here in Genesis 11 is likely that like this Babylonian way of thinking is like what we're trying to normalize and centralize and consolidate. This is a cautionary tale about the consolidation of power and the shadow side of like doing that without like the imago Dei in mind. Like let's build something in our own image. Let's not let God's picture of like the flourishing of other people come to mind. And then when you look at it that way, what are we doing? We're repeating what happened last week in Cain's city. Hey, we're going to build a place that's for security and safety that ends in Lamech saying, hey, if a kid bruises me, I cut their head off. It becomes a place, another place of retaliatory violence. Like that's the directive of what is being disrupted in Babel, right? We're trying to build a definition of security on our own terms. This picture of greatness, one that says, security, greatness, concentrated strength. Babel isn't just a tower in that sense. It's like an empire impulse, okay? And when we see it through that lens, the story begins to make a little bit more sense. God is not just mad that like you're building a tall tower. There's something more insidious happening here. Miroslav Volf is a famous Croatian theologian that grew up in the former Yugoslavia and watched and witnessed like totalitarianism and authoritarianism like devastate people around him, devastate him and his family. And he wrote a book called Exclusion and Embrace that was very popular in the early 90s when the Yugoslav Republic kind of fell apart and became the various countries that it is today. He gained quite a bit of notoriety. Here's a quote that I think plays and ties to this theme. He says, "The principle cannot be denied. The fiercer the struggle against the injustice you suffer, the blinder you will be to the injustice you inflict. We tend to translate the presumed wrongness of our enemies into an unfaltering conviction of our own rightness." And that's a hint at like the thing that's being built in Babel. Our own definition of rightness, our own consolidation of power that doesn't consider God's imago Dei, that doesn't consider the stewardship of God's creation, and then turns into another version of Lamech's city last week. It's a powerful quote. But to quote the old infomercials, but wait, there's more. There's another part of chapter 10, verses 31 and 32. This is about the sons of Noah. These are the sons of Shem, which was one of the sons of Noah, by their clans and languages and the territories and nations. These are the clans of Noah's sons according to their lines of descent within their nations. From these the nations spread out over all the earth after the flood. Then they said, "Come, let us build for ourselves." Okay, but sorry, we're back to verse 4. So like there's a scattering that's supposed to happen, okay? There was a call, just like a Genesis call to like steward, there was a call to scatter. But what are we doing in Babel? We're consolidating security and like building our own version of security. Now let's talk about Jewish traditions of translating this text. That's going to help us too. If we look at different schools and different rabbis and different rabbinical traditions in Hebrew, there's a couple different things people have posited are going on here. And this is fascinating. One is that people think that maybe what we're building here is a lightning rod, right? Something that in the future is going to keep floods from happening in the way in which the flood happened to them in that region and devastated them. There's the thought, another rabbinical school says they were trying to build a tower so that they could fight the gods. So they could fight with God and basically say, hey, this isn't cool, what you just did to us. There's another one that said, hey, we're going to build something so big that we could pierce the sky and we'll drain the rain. So there won't be another flood the way it happened before. We'll be able, with our own ingenuity, to siphon the water from the sky that will prevent anything like what just happened earlier in Genesis from ever happening again. And what do all of those neglect? The fact that God has promised the people that the thing that just happened will never happen again. So God has told them the thing that just happened, the flood, is not going to happen again. And they went, yeah, but we got to make sure. We just got to be prepared just in case you get a little persnickety again. And therein, we see a clue, again, to what might be happening. That Babel isn't just humanity works together and it's terrible, but the foolishness and the folly of trying to build something that preserves our own security versus a call to scatter and steward and appreciate the different nuances of the cultures that are going about. I don't ascribe to any one of those Hebrew scholarship ideas, but what I do appreciate is that this is a text that is challenging some of the ways in which you define security. Think about this. Think about this from the lens of a secure life, right? The tensions that we wrestle with as a parent between what's the right amount of helicoptering over the circumstances that keep my kids safe, and then one day going okay, my kids begin to resent that at some point, and I have to figure out how to readjust those things. Think about how we can in churches, right? Obsess over the idea of personal calling. What's this thing I'm supposed to do in the world that will make me feel fulfilled? Many times at the expense of the primary thing God has called every believer to do, to love God, to love people, to be part of the discipleship-making movement in the world. That's a primary call. That's not an optional add-on for those of you that are just high achievers. That's a primary way in which you go to the fire station, you go as a plumber, you go as a teacher, you go as a neighbor. But we will often think of calling just as this, what is this thing I'm supposed to do in the world, in the city I'm supposed to do it in? We have this human ability to be so focused on building towers of security that we don't often just, till we stop back and the circumstances show us they're kind of a folly. There's kind of an illusion to it all. You can build a great life with a lot of security, and you can't stop cancer from happening. You can be the greatest driver, and it won't matter if Mr. Joe wants to roll through the stop sign, because stop signs are optional in Baltimore. It won't matter. It's a house of cards. And we're being invited to consider security through a different lens. There's the ruin of making a name for ourselves and the refuge of God's picture of greatness. Right? What's probably happening here is the building of a ziggurat. Okay? So now let's go back to this idea of God coming down. Let's look at verse 5 through 8, and then we're going to talk about a ziggurat. Okay? 5 through 8. So God comes down. And again, our Western reading of this is kind of God comes in and kicks down the Legos and is really ticked off and is wash up for dinner. Wash your hands. I can't believe you would build a tower like that. Sorry, the dad rage coming out, right? Coming in with his white tennis shoes and his calf socks and his jorts, to just rain on the parade like dad do, right? But the Lord came down and said the Lord came down to see the city and the tower we are building. The Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand each other. If the idea here is about consolidating power and conquest, then perhaps this is not just punishment, it's a mercy. It's God disrupting the illusion before people begin to really hurt one another or enslave one another or do all the things that they're actually going to do in the rest of the book of Genesis. Right? But there's a temporary moment of disruption. There's a ziggurat being built here, most likely, from like the context of like where this is happening and the region that this is in. So what you see here is a ziggurat from 1300 BC. This is the Grand Ziggurat of Ur, modern-day Iraq. 720,000 baked bricks, probably very much from a construction standpoint in line with the tools of the trade from the first century. 200 feet in width, 150 feet long, and about 100 feet high. About 100 feet high. So not very tall. All right, let's just say that the Grand Ziggurat of Ur is a shadow of what the Tower of Babel was. So there's like 5 of these stacked on top of each other. At that point, we've gotten to like the modern equivalent of the tallest roller coaster in the world. Right? Like not very tall if you're trying to combat the sky and like pierce it and make it a thing, right? A modern skyscraper like laughs at the size of this. We're not mocking the ancient ingenuity. This is incredible craftsmanship. But like it doesn't begin to touch the idea of building something to the sky. Right? And if you've flown in a plane, like a skyscraper is not that impressive. If you've been to space, flying in a plane, not that impressive. What are we saying here? That any of this stuff in contrast to the bigness of God is like a silly illusion. Like if we're trying to construct anything as big and as meaningful and as massive as the kingdom and vastness of God, it's kind of a silly venture, isn't it? But think about how much energy you expel. Think about how much time, think about how much money you expel trying to build a kingdom of your own security versus trusting in the greater story. The Tower of Babel says God's not just coming down, kicking down like an angry dad. God is saying, hey, like this is a silly illusion and we've got to do things a better way. If we go to the next chapter, we'll see that God is again entering the story by going to a guy named Abram and saying, I will make your name great. Not because you build a ziggurat, not because you actually even have the ability to conceive. Your wife won't. It's going to speak to the perception of a self-made picture of greatness versus a received one, a manufactured unity versus a spirit-driven unity, a stewardship of created order versus a manipulation of created order. It's going to reverse the thing that is trying to go down in Babel, and God is going to continue to advance the story. So that the city, again, as we move next week, is going to become a conduit of blessing, not just a conduit of condemnation and hurt. We're going to break the cycle of Lamech, okay? And when we move to the New Testament, this is where we'll wrap, right? If we look at the New Testament, we see some reversals of the Babel story. What is Pentecost? Pentecost is a reversal, right? From one language, many different people begin to hear the good news of Jesus. What is the New Jerusalem? What is the incarnation of Jesus? Rather than try to build a tower to heaven, God is going to come down and make a way for us to reach God. There's a reversal here that the story is pushing us to. So today, what are we doing when we come to communion? What are we doing when we remember? Well, communion is really a reflection on empire and centralized power. If you come to Rome and say there is a better king and a better way, you get crucified on a cross. A self-made attempt to preserve the power and line of Augustus and the Caesars puts Jesus to death. But what we celebrate as followers of Jesus is that it didn't kill the kingdom of God. In fact, it didn't kill Jesus. The power of God to show the folly of that empire is why we celebrate. So communion is a pathway to remember we don't have to build the tower to heaven. God has come down. We don't have to trust in our own security and ingenuity. God is shaping our picture of greatness. Communion says, will you trust my story? Will you trust my story through the lens of the ways in which you try to build your own pictures of control? Will you trust my story through the ways in which you're trying to make a name for yourself? Will you trust my story through the ways in which you are trying to avoid the feeling of being scattered? Will you trust the story in contrast to other pictures of greatness that are advertising themselves to you as a way? Will you trust the story as God is working and unwinding those other attachments in your life so that you might experience a life that is truly life? The bread and cup of communion remind us that God has come into our midst. May we, as God's people this morning, take time to trust in that story and to participate in that kingdom. There's 4 stations in the room that you can go and receive bread and cup and just spend some time quietly reflecting on that in your own life and the lives of the people around you. And we'll continue to worship and pray out of that time. God, would you help us to not just look at this story as just a cautionary tale about self-reliance and sort of roll our eyes at it, but to really see the ways in which our attempt to control and secure and attach ourselves to a picture of greatness is actually trapping us. Lord, you've called us to a citizenship in a greater kingdom. Help us to receive it and walk in it. In the name of Jesus, our hope. Amen.